Governor Carter, a CBS and New York Times poll has found that liberal voters seem to think that you are a liberal candidate, conservative voters think you're a conservative candidate, and moderate voters think you're a moderate candidate. The numbers are pretty hard on that. Does that indicate to you that you have perhaps campaigned as a sort of a wishy-washy candidate, being all things to all people, not taking any particular position yourself?
No, I take specific positions. I think what it indicates is that people don't like to be put in boxes. You know, what used to be a straight liberal attitude in a very ideological way, and what used to be conservative attitudes are now very much clouded in the public's mind. For instance, I've had very strong support from blacks. I've had very strong support from tough businessmen who want to see the government run properly. And in between, good support from a wide range of supporters, both in New Hampshire, Florida, and also in Maine and Vermont and Iowa. And I don't think that the voters are in doubt about what I say. They just feel that I'm the kind of person that they can trust, and if they are liberal, I think I'm compatible with their views. If they are moderate, the same, and if they voted as conservative, I think they still feel that I'm a good president. So I think this is a kind of image that's a good one. It's based on compatibility with voters, not because they've put me in little boxes as a certain sort of an ideologically committed person.
From CBS News, Washington. A spontaneous and unrehearsed news interview on Face the Nation with former Governor of Georgia, Jimmy Carter, a candidate for the Democratic presidential nomination. Governor Carter will be questioned by CBS News correspondent Ed Rabel, syndicated columnist for the Chicago Sun-Times, Robert Novak, and CBS News correspondent George Herman. Face the Nation is produced by CBS News, which is solely responsible for the selection of today's guest and panel.
Governor Carter, you say that you think liberals consider you a liberal and moderates a moderate and so forth because of the blurring of the labels and the categories, and you say you have taken stands on the issues. Yet some of the stands you've taken on the issues seem to some critics to be a little bit blurry. For example, the right to work law, the repeal of the right to work law is certainly not the most important issue in the country. Nevertheless, you've said that you will sign such a repeal if it should be passed, and you're also on record as opposing such a repeal.
Well, when I was running for governor of Georgia, I told the labor leaders and also the public that if the Georgia legislature repealed the right to work laws, that I would be glad to sign it into law. That was when my responsibilities were to Georgia. At that time, I did not favor a repeal of 14B, which is a national law. Now that I approach the presidency as a potential president, I've taken the same position, which I think is fairly consistent, although there's some inconsistency there, I admit. But I want everybody to understand that if the Congress passes a repeal of 14B, that I'll be glad to sign it into law.
Governor, in line with this question of wishy-washiness and indeterminate positions, you have said constantly on your campaign that you're in favor of national comprehensive mandatory health insurance, but you don't tell how it would be financed, how much it would cost, and whether it would be under private or public auspices. You prepared to say that today, or do you think the public doesn't need to know your answers to that question?
Well, I don't know the answer yet. There are two phases of a national comprehensive mandatory health insurance program that I'd like to reserve a right to decide later on. When I have more time to study it, I would presume that before the general election is, or if I am nominated, I'd spell it out specifically. But I would like to reserve the right to include the private sector, say Blue Cross and Blue Shield, as a co-partner with the federal government in the administration of a national health insurance program. And as far as the exact percentages that would be derived from general funds, employees, and employer contributions, that's another subject that I don't yet know about my exact stand, but I think that's not very important to the voters. What they want to know is, are we going to have a national comprehensive mandatory health insurance program? I'm committed to that, and will work hard as president to get it implemented.
Governor, the centerpiece of your campaign has been reorganization, as it was in Georgia, and you say you don't want anybody to vote for you this year who doesn't want to see the federal government reorganized.
Right.
You talk about 1,900 agencies being reorganized to 200, and yet you really aren't willing to say which agencies are going to be eliminated, what's going to happen to certain agencies. Why can't you tell us now what's going to happen?
Well, there's no way for me to envision at this point as a full-time candidate which particular agencies in the federal government would survive 3 years after I'm in the White House. It took me a full year just to study Georgia's government. When we had 300 agencies to start with, we abolished 278 of them through consolidation or complete elimination. We now have about 1,900, perhaps more, in the federal government, and I intend to cut those down to no more than 200. It's a goal I've set for myself that I think is achievable.
Well, can the voters really make a judgment on you if you cannot tell them specifically what you're going to do now?
Well, whether or not they can, they'll have to, because there's no way that I can take off from campaigning, do a complete and definitive study of what the federal government is and what it's going to be 3 or 4 years in the future, even if I was in the White House now.
Governor,
I'll give full prerogatives. I couldn't do it, but let me give you one other point. We now have 72 agencies responsible for health. I can't say which of those 72 might survive, but we certainly don't need that many. I would say 2 would be a gracious plenty. We have 42 responsible for education. Which ones of those should survive, I can't say, but I certainly know that we don't need 42 agencies responsible for education.
Governor, I'll give you a question you don't have to take off from campaigning to answer, and that
Please
is
do.
that no matter how many agencies you eliminated in Georgia, the payroll in your 4 years of governor increased about 24% in the state.
That's right.
Now, in the federal government, would you reduce the federal payroll, and if so, by how much, forgetting about how many agencies you eliminate?
I can't say that I would. We reduced administrative costs tremendously in Georgia and shifted the saved money into better services for our people. This resulted in a drastic reduction in the growth of the state payroll. The last year I was in office, the payroll increased about 2.4%, and I can certainly guarantee that administrative costs in the federal government would be reduced drastically compared to total cost.
But a lot of people have the idea that you would decrease the number of federal bureaucrats. Actually, you would keep about the same number or more on. Is that correct?
I can't say that it would be exactly the same or more, but the portion of our federal budget that goes to administrative cost will be cut substantially. We did it in Georgia. There's no doubt in my mind it can be done in the federal government.
But you did increase the payroll.
Total, yes, but this was in mental health centers, better prison reform, more teachers, better alcoholism treatment centers, and so forth, out of desk jobs, administrative jobs, into service jobs. Yes, that did occur.
Let's talk about campaigning for a moment, since you bring that up. What are your campaign plans? What is your strategy for the next period?
Well, I'm immediately looking at the next 4 states, which is Chicago, Illinois areas, Tuesday, and then North Carolina a week from Tuesday, and then the following week, Kansas and Virginia. That's the next 4 states, encompassing about 325 delegates. And then the following 2 states, the 5th and 6th ones, will be New York and Wisconsin on the 6th of April, which has about the same number of delegates, about 340.
How do you think you'll do in Illinois?
I think I'll do well. I've got 2 tough opponents there, well, maybe 3 tough ones. George Wallace is making an all-out effort in Illinois, so is Sergeant Shriver, who formerly lived and worked in Illinois, as you know, plus Fred Harris, who has some very fervent supporters. Then North Carolina will be another showdown vote.
Well, let me stop at Illinois for a moment. I hate to get into this numbers game, but
Sure.
Perhaps we should have some idea right now what you think you need to do in Illinois.
Well, I would like to come in first in the preferential primary. That's what I would need to do to be pleased. And we're challenging 84 delegates in Illinois. I would like very much to get at least a 4th of those and show to the other uncommitted delegates, or those who are committed to the so-called Stevenson slate, which is controlled to a substantial degree by Mayor Daley, or the Walker slate, which is for the governor, that I do have strong support in Illinois. I think it would help me later on when the time comes for those voters to make, the delegates to make a final decision. If I can do well in that district and say, look, I carried the votes of your own people back home, therefore you ought to support me in the convention, it would help a lot. So I'd say at least a 4th of the challenged delegates, plus to win the primary.
Governor,
You really need, sooner or later, you are going to need the votes and the delegates of the big industrial northern states, are you not? Or can you write those off?
No, I'm not writing off anything.
No, but do you need them? Do you
Yes, I
require
need
them?
them.
Are they an important part of your strategy to gain
Yes,
the-
it is, and of course Illinois is the first time that I'm really going all out to win delegates and votes. But I might point out that that's kind of an idle exercise, because in the 13 southern states, which for instance are being written off completely by Senator Jackson, There are about the same number of votes as exist in Michigan, plus Pennsylvania, plus Ohio, plus New York.
678 delegates.
I believe so, and that's about the same as the top 4 states in the East.
Well, now,
so
how about
I think
those
that's
4
a good.
states?
I'm sorry?
How about those 4 states, New York, Pennsylvania, Michigan, and Ohio, with their 737 delegates?
Well, we're going to do as well as we can in all 4 of those states. I'm in at all of them.
Yeah.
But the point is that my opponents are just writing off a total region of the country.
Can you win, and will you win, a substantial portion of those 737 northern industrial state delegates?
I believe so. Yes, sir. We've got good, strong support in Ohio, well organized there, and in Pennsylvania. We'll do well in Michigan. You know, in New York, this is a very difficult state because it's still fairly well controlled by the political bosses of New York. We just recently, this week, got the legislature and others attempting to put my name on the ballot at all. And now my opponents, particularly Senator Jackson, is challenging on technicalities my right to have delegates in the different districts. But we'll do the best we can under those adverse circumstances.
Governor, when you were ever asked on the campaign trail about foreign policy, I've noticed that you always make a criticism and get a great deal of applause for it, that one of the things wrong with our foreign policy is that whenever you walk into an embassy and see, quote, a fat, bloated, ignorant, rich, major contributor to Nixon who can't even speak the language of the country in which he serves, you think that's part of what's wrong with our foreign policy. Governor, can you name one such fat, ignorant, bloated ambassador who can't speak the language?
No, I wouldn't want to name any.
Well, can you name one, though? You make the accusation all over. There are only 4 ambassadors, Governor, who gave contributions to Mr. Nixon. Are any of them fit that category?
Well, I wouldn't want to name names, but the point that I make is, and I don't do it every time I make a foreign policy speech, by the way. Every now and then I do, but not often. When I've been in foreign countries and go into the embassies, it's obvious from talking to the people in the countries and talking to the ambassadors that they are not qualified to be diplomats for this country. They are appointed as a political payoff.
Well,
the point I make is that whether they are actually fat or thin, that they are appointed because they are political interrelationships and not because of quality. Now, in the last time I was in Europe, for instance, out of 33 ambassadors who served in the whole European theater, only 3 of them were professional diplomats. The others were appointed for political reasons.
Governor, your credibility has been challenged by your critics and by some people in the press, and there's only 4 people who are now serving as ambassadors who gave money to Nixon. 3 of them know the language of the country that they work in, and 1 of them is taking language training. Mm-hmm. Isn't that bordering on demagoguery when you make a flat statement about these kind of fat, bloated, ignorant ambassadors?
No, I don't believe so. I think it illustrates the point very clearly. And when you say presently serving, I presume that you're not including those that have served in the last 3 or 4 years.
Well, you're talking about the present foreign policy,
I was talking about the countries where I visited in the last 4 years while I was governor and since then. I don't know exactly who the ambassadors are now. I haven't visited foreign countries in recent months.
Are you going to continue?
Except Japan.
Are you going to continue to use that formulation and get applause from it?
I may or may not.
Governor, there's something else you do on the campaign trail that in front of some audiences you tick off the names of great Americans like Thomas Jefferson, Abraham Lincoln, Martin Luther King Jr. And I've noticed, though, in front of some all-white audiences, you omit the name of Martin Luther King. Now, do you do that intentionally, or have you just forgotten his name?
No. As a matter of fact, when you and some of the other newsmen asked me that on the plane the other day, it had not been a deliberate thing. What I ordinarily do is if the audience does have black people in it, I always include Martin Luther King Jr.'s name, even if there's only 3 or 4 black people in the whole audience. But since that was pointed out to me, I have very carefully always included Dr. Martin Luther King Jr.'s name, and will continue to do it.
Had you intentionally forgotten? Did you do it intentionally before? Or?
No, I wasn't, except that I always intentionally put Martin Luther King Jr.'s name in, if they're all black people in the audience, because he was a great American.
Why'd you leave it out when they were all white?
Well, it was not a deliberate thing, and it won't be done anymore, but it was just a reaction to the audience and what they would, and the leaders in which they would be interested.
Governor, I gather that Senator Jackson irritated you a little bit during the course of the Massachusetts primary, and you said, I believe, while you were in Florida, that Senator Jackson exploited an issue that has racist connotations, and you said, I don't want to win that kind of a race.
Yes.
Now, checking back through the files, I find that famous AP dispatch of 1972, February, which quotes you as saying that you would support, in your own state, a statewide boycott of schools Only if the General Assembly fails to pass a resolution calling for a constitutional amendment prohibiting busing, and that then you might support the boycott of schools as a last resort. Isn't that a kind of a campaign, or not a campaign, but a statement with racist connotations?
I think not. At that time, of course, I was not a candidate. I was governor.
Understand.
And I was faced with a massive effort, supported by many political figures in Georgia, to mount an all-out boycott against our public school system because of the threat of busing in Augusta. As an alternative to the boycott, and in order to hold down racial tension in the state, I said that the better way to handle it was to let the legislature pass a simple, non-binding resolution calling on the Congress to address the issue through a constitutional amendment rather than having all of our kids leave the schools all over Georgia. The impact of my statement was to defuse racial tension, and I don't think it was designed to prey on the divisive and emotional and racist attitudes that did exist in a few of our people.
If you were elected president, how do you think you would be able to exert some leadership on the question of schools and integration?
Well, I think
do you have some ideas, some formulas for achieving certain kinds of integration without
busing?
So.
One way is that I could use my own family and my own background as an example. I think that the passage of the Civil Rights Act was the best thing that ever happened to the South in my lifetime. The integration of our schools has not been a step backward for us. It's been a step forward. I think we've made a lot of progress in the South, and I think most Southerners are very proud of it. I'm not in favor of mandatory busing. We tried it in the South, and it didn't work. The only kids that ever got bused are the poor children. I've never seen a rich child bust, so we worked out in Atlanta a busing system that is my favorite. And I would emphasize this, but I've also made it clear that as president I would be sworn to uphold the law, and if the federal courts rule contrary to my own personal desire, that I would support the federal court.
Well,
also,
Governor,
I do not favor a constitutional amendment to prohibit busing. I think it would be a very divisive thing.
This is the second time this kind of issue has come up in this program and this broadcast, and it disturbs me a little bit because I keep hearing you saying that you would follow rather than that you would lead. If such and such a law were passed, you would sign it. Doesn't, in your theory, doesn't the president have some ability and some obligation to lead and to try to get things done himself rather than simply signing things that come to him?
I certainly do. and to provide equality of opportunity for black people and other minority groups in the schools would be a very, very important responsibility of mine as president. I think I met that responsibility very clearly in Georgia. As a matter of fact, if there's one uniform base of support that I've demonstrated in all the primaries so far, it is support of black people who have seen what I have done in Georgia as governor. And I would maintain the same posture toward black people as president.
Governor,
but I still would have to say that I can't mislead the people by saying that I would undo Supreme Court rulings, or if a court ruled contrary to my own beliefs that I would try to fight against a court. I would support the court rulings, even if it did disagree with what I basically believe is best.
Governor, you tend to have it both ways on both busing and abortion by saying you are opposed to forced busing and you are opposed to abortion, but you would not attempt to amend the Constitution on either issue. Is that because you do think you would fail to amend the Constitution, or do you have some philosophical complaint against any further amendments to the Constitution?
No, I don't have any philosophical commitments that would be overriding. But we, for 15 or 20 years, in the South have dealt with the race issue. It was very divisive for us, very difficult question for us to face. We faced it well, and there was a lot of bloodshed, a lot of heartache. But I would not favor trying to prohibit busing in the state, in the states of the country, by passing a constitutional amendment. It would just reopen old wounds and old sores and have every legislature bogged down in debating back and forth whether or not to try to prevent busing with a constitutional amendment. I think that's the wrong way to go about it. We have successfully overcome that problem. And I think that Boston and other places now, 10, 15 years behind the South, I think eventually they'll come basically to the Atlanta plan, which says voluntary busing is okay, but the blacks have to be adequately represented in running the school system. That's my preference. And I don't favor a constitutional amendment on that subject.
Now, I just brought up the abortion issue, and you say on the campaign stump that some people think that abortion is murder. Do you?
That's a hard question for me to answer. I have a deep feeling that abortion is wrong. At what stage in the development of the fetus it becomes murder, I can't say. But But I wish that there were never any abortions. It really bothers me about it. The Supreme Court has ruled that the first 13 weeks a mother and the doctor have a right to have an abortion. I wish that there were no abortions, but I can't say at what point the abortion becomes murder.
Governor, many liberals who supported you through the Florida primary supported you because you felt you could defeat George Wallace, and you did defeat him there, are now having second thoughts about continuing their support. Do you need them now to win the Democratic nomination, the liberals?
Well, as a matter of fact, I don't agree with your premise. I have seen a shift of several of the liberals who were holding back toward me since the Massachusetts primary. I think my liberal strength has been increasing since Massachusetts, and I believe that after Florida it will continue. Yes, I do need them very badly and would like to have them. Some of the leading liberal political activists, particularly in Washington, have never known me, and I've never had a chance to know them. And they've been very reluctant to support me. But they are fine people, and I would like very much to have their support, yes.
Governor, this brings up perhaps the most unpleasant question I have to ask you, and that is one of sort of sectarian, sectional rivalry. There's been a lot of talk that some people in the South believe that liberals in the North are rejecting you because you are a Southerner, and I detect a good deal of anger in the South at the idea that Northerners cannot support you because you are a Southerner. Do you feel that way? Do you feel that Northerners have some anti-Southern bigotry or prejudice about you?
Just a few. I haven't suffered because I'm a Southerner, politically speaking.
You have not?
I don't believe so. I did very well in Maine, very well in Vermont, very well in New Hampshire. In fact, out of the first 4 New England primaries, I've carried 3 of them first place. There is still some difficulty in my convincing some northern liberals that a Southerner can be a good, honest, decent, non-biased president.
Are you implying that this prejudice that you encounter is among northern liberals?
That's right. What there is of it. But I want to hasten to say that I don't consider it to be a major factor. I think this is a tiny majority, a tiny minority. And it doesn't concern me because of the results of the election so far, but I wish it didn't exist at all. And I believe that the fear of me, because I am from the South, is dissipating rapidly.
Governor, when you're ever asked about your desire to cut the defense budget $7 or $8 billion, you always mention how many generals or admirals there are. Yes. Do you know, either in percentages or flat amounts, what the cost of the salaries of the generals and admirals is?
No, I don't.
It's 0.4% of 1%, 0.04 of 1%, and $41 million. Don't you think that also borders on exaggeration and making that a major issue?
No, it doesn't. Because the actual number of admirals and generals is mirrored all the way down to the ranks. We have too much of an overload of bureaucracy in the Defense Department. As I said many times, we have more admirals and generals than we had when we had 11 million Americans in uniform at the end of the Second World War. And when you have an admiral, you've got an awful lot of people under him who are almost admirals. We've got an admiral now for 1.7 ships. We've got 8 captains for every ship, which I think is ridiculous.
This flow of statistics, and thank you very much, Governor Carter, for being with us on Face the Nation.
Thank you.
Today on Face the Nation, former Governor of Georgia Jimmy Carter, a candidate for the Democratic presidential nomination, was interviewed by CBS News correspondent Ed Rabel, syndicated columnist for the Chicago Sun-Times Robert Novak, and CBS News correspondent George Herman. Next week, another prominent figure in the news will face the nation.
Welcome to Face the Nation. I'm Leslie Stahl reporting from San Francisco. Can a housewife from Queens help unify the Democratic Party, which has been a house divided against itself?
Walter Mondale and his choice for Vice President Geraldine Ferraro will come to the Democratic Convention in hopes of binding up the wounds inflicted during the harsh primary battles. But will challenger Gary Hart keep fighting? We'll ask the senator from Colorado. Was Mondale's naming a woman for vice president a masterstroke or a major mistake? We'll ask conservative political analyst Kevin Phillips and Brooklyn District Attorney Elizabeth Holtzman. Will the Republicans try to make Jimmy Carter a major issue? We'll ask the former president himself. The Democrats' man-woman ticket. Is it a winning combination? An issue facing the nation.
From CBS News San Francisco, Face the Nation with White House correspondent Leslie Stahl.
Congresswoman Geraldine Ferraro represents Archie Bunker's district in Queens.
Boy, the way Glenn Miller plays
songs that made my
Walter Mondale was gambling that the country would come to see Ferraro in the same glowing light as her working-class constituents in Queens do.
girls were girls and men were men.
I looked for the best vice president, and I found her in Jerry Ferraro.
Ferraro is living up to her reviews as an outspoken, tough campaigner.
The president walks around calling himself a good Christian. I don't for 1 minute believe it because the policies are so terribly unfair.
The Republicans are already questioning her qualifications for the job.
The women who have advanced in our party and who are coming up through the ranks today are doing it by merit.
I've known Geraldine a long time. She's very capable. She's, I think, would be one of the sterling potential women to serve as a vice presidential candidates.
The Republicans may decide to concentrate on linking Mondale with his old running mate, Jimmy Carter. For the moment, though, Mondale is concentrating on running a harmonious convention here in San Francisco, where there's already been a violent street demonstration. And he's trying to pull together the warring factions of the party.
Every debate does not mean division. Debate really means democracy.
Gary Hart, too, is being asked to march in the Mondale-Ferraro parade. But
I intend to be the nominee of this party and the next president of the United States.
Joining us now in the CBS News anchor booth at the Convention Center is Senator Gary Hart. Senator, it's the eve of the convention. Why do you keep insisting you're going to be the nominee? You don't have the delegates. A lot of people are saying it's a divisive factor here.
No, I haven't heard anyone seriously urge that my presence in this race is divisive. We have at least 1,300 or 1,400 delegates coming from more primaries and more caucuses than any other candidate. And I think by bringing those delegates to this convention and the millions of voters that they represent, I'm doing this party a benefit and a favor, I think, for this fall.
Do you really think you can win the nomination?
Yes, I do, and I think the issue here is which of us has the better chance of winning the election.
Excuse me, Senator, but you know, the numbers just don't stack up.
The numbers have never stacked up. From New Hampshire, before, during the middle part of the primaries. This campaign has come up against great odds all the time.
When are you going to start showing the Democrats that you can be a team player?
Oh, I think I've done that throughout this race. I saw all the introductory material here about this program, about the wars and the fighting and the friction and all the rest of it. There are going to be very, very few fights on this floor over rules or credentials, none on credentials. I've given up all the credentials challenges. I've done a great deal, I think, to help heal this party.
Well, I know you say that you think you're going to win the nomination. CBS News says the delegates committed to Mr. Mondale now are over the necessary amount to give him the nomination. But giving you...
Well, they said that on June the 6th.
Well, but it's true.
No delegate is legally bound at this convention for the first time in years. And the only delegate count that matters is the one taken on Wednesday night.
On the very slight possibility then, Senator, that Mr. Mondale can possibly get these delegates to nominate him, how vigorously do you plan to campaign for him and Geraldine Ferraro?
I plan to campaign for this ticket as hard as any Democrat, any American, because I believe it's crucial to this country for Ronald Reagan to be replaced, and no one will work harder for this ticket than I will.
Now, you've been saying you have a better chance of beating Ronald Reagan than Walter Mondale. Do you think he can beat Ronald Reagan?
Oh, yes, I do. I think I can do it more easily. I think I can broaden this party's base, but I think Walter Mondale could win.
Why do you say that now?
Well, I've always said that. I've never said he couldn't win. I've always said I have a better chance of winning.
Burt Lance, Jimmy Carter's former budget director. Walter Mondale apparently wanted to name him the head of the Democratic Party, and the Democratic leaders rose up in revolt. And you seemed a little unhappy with that when you heard it, too. What was the major objection to Burt Lance in your mind?
I didn't have an objection to him. I only questioned the need, before this convention began, to replace a very, very good chair Charles Manat. I think he's done an excellent job. He has been very fair to me and to my campaign. So I didn't know what the hurry was to replace him on the eve of a convention in his home state.
Well, now people in your campaign say that the objection that they felt was that Burt Lance was a throwback to Jimmy Carter, the old ways.
No one officially in my campaign took that position because that's not our campaign's position. I think the issue wasn't Burt Lance. The issue was what was wrong with Charles Manat, and I don't think anything. I think he's done an excellent job.
You are coming to this convention among other, for other reasons, but one big reason is to give a major speech here. And we're told that you are going to give the speech on your New Ideas theme that you have been campaigning on. And I'm wondering whether that will be interpreted once again as a sort of attack on Walter Mondale again, as the old way, as you kept calling him, the old arrangement.
No, I don't, if this party is precluded from talking about the future, or any of its leaders from talking about where we ought to be headed and what we can do to solve this country's problems, then I think it's going to be a pretty dull convention and a pretty dull party. This party has always been a party open to ideas, and that's what my candidacy is all about. I didn't come here to give a speech. I came here to represent the 7 million voters in most of the primaries, most of the caucuses who supported me.
You know, other people have come to conventions and allowed their names to be put up, and even when it's been pretty clear that they weren't going to win, but they don't come to the convention and say, I intend to be the nominee the way you are. It's very unusual, and I think that people really don't understand why you're doing it.
Well, it depends on who the other people you're talking about are. I won more primaries in this race than any other candidate. In fact, I won more primaries than all the other candidates put together, more caucuses, all the states west of the Mississippi but 2, all of New England. And I got as many votes as any other candidate in this race. Why not come to this convention? Why should I stay home? I'm doing this party, I think, a favor. I don't know what the rush is to get me out of this race. I am a legitimate candidate, and I think, opened up this party to an awful lot of people who would not otherwise be involved. That is a benefit to this party.
And you don't think that you are now, you have gone to a point where people consider that you are an ununifying factor? By just a few days ago criticizing Mondale for having a vice presidential process that you said looked a lot like pandering.
I said it could if it went on too long. That's what I said. No, I met with Walter Mondale. He had no objection. He didn't ask me to drop out of this race. He understood perfectly why I'm coming to this convention. No serious Democratic leader has urged me not to come to this convention. In fact, Tip O'Neill, Mo Udall, and all the other party leaders said they thought it was a good idea.
All right, well, you have a minority plank that the Mondale people say they'd like you to withdraw as a symbol of unity to the party. Will you withdraw? First explain what it is.
Well, first, we've withdrawn an awful lot of planks. As I recall, the 80 convention, where Senator Kennedy was there were some 26 or 30 fights on issues on the floor. This is just one, and it has to do with a crucial question, and that's this country's policy in Central America. We cannot have the same policy as Ronald Reagan. We are different, and I think this country does not want to lose young American lives in a war in Central America, and that's what that platform issue is all about.
But are you going to fight for it, or are you going to have some kind of compromise or unity move to...
Well, we've been trying to negotiate some acceptable language for everyone in this party. But it is a central and critical question, and one that I feel very, very strongly about. And I don't think it's going to divide the convention to have a serious debate for half an hour about what our policy in Central America ought to be.
So you're not going to withdraw it?
No, I think we intend to present it, and we intend to have a debate on it and have a vote of this convention.
The Mondale people have been suggesting you would withdraw it, but that's not true.
No, we're continuing to negotiate with them, and I hope they'll accept the recommendations that we're making.
Are you going to run again for the Senate from Colorado?
Oh, I don't know. I have 2 more years in my Senate term if I'm not the nominee of this party, and 1986 is a long way away.
Let me ask you very quickly, we're running out of time. Geraldine Ferraro, are you for her?
Oh, yes.
Does she help Mr. Mondale in the West?
She helps Mr. Mondale nationally. She is, I think, an excellent choice, and I think she'll, if she is the presidential candidate of this ticket, she'll be excellent.
Gary Hart, thank you very much for being with us. See you at the convention, and we will be back with more in a moment. Jimmy Carter will deliver a speech at the convention tomorrow night. Walter Mondale's been urged to distance himself from Mr. Carter as the Republicans have been trying to make the former president an issue in the campaign. We asked Mr. Carter about that during an interview a few days ago in Plains.
Well, I doubt it. the issues will be there, and I don't think they relate to presidents who've served in the past. But matters concerning nuclear arms control, peace in the Middle East, peace in Central America, our relationships with the Soviet Union, the size of a deficit, these are the kinds of things that will be brought to the forefront as issues in the fall. And my hope is that the decision will be made on the issues, on the character of the two parties, and on the character of the two men who might potentially lead our country.
Well, his people say that what they're going to try and do is link Mondale to you and then bring up all the things that they think the public saw as negatives in your administration.
And I would presume that, on the other hand, the Democrats will bring up the elements that were positive in my administration.
Let me quote something you said recently at a news conference. You said you thought it would be a mistake for Mondale to associate himself very closely with you.
Yes.
Why?
Well, I don't think that Mondale ought to run his campaign based upon our past administration. Nor would Reagan want to run his campaign based upon the administrations of Richard Nixon or Gerald Ford or Herbert Hoover or anyone else. I think the nation is much more inclined to look to the future than to the past. And we had some things in my administration that were very admirable and of which I'm very proud. We had some things that happened in the administration that are not politically advantageous. And I would guess that both candidates would try to emphasize those things that they thought would help them most.
Well, you have admitted, even in this interview, that the hostages hurt you a lot in
Sure.
the campaign. And if they can conjure up that image and pin it on Mr. Mondale, obviously they're hoping it'll hurt him a lot.
Well, that's dangerous business because to talk about 70 or so hostages, all of whom came back from the Mideast safe and to freedom on the one hand, compared to the debacle in Lebanon when we lost so many people in a useless and ill-advised military adventure, I think would not bode well for Reagan.
You have made a lot of the fact that Mr. Mondale was your partner.
Yes.
How important is that really?
I found Mondale to be very helpful to me. He made very important trips to foreign nations. I think after a few months, the foreign leaders knew that for the first time, perhaps in history, the vice president actually spoke with the full authority of the president. And when we had negotiating sessions with the Chinese, with Begin and Sadat, at the Camp David meetings and also in their own countries, when we met across the table with Gromyko or Dobrynin to negotiate the SALT II treaty and so forth, Mondale was right there. I made the ultimate decisions, of course, and enjoyed doing so. And on the few occasions when he and I disagreed, it was understood clearly that he had to support my position, and he always did.
The Republicans say that the single biggest issue in the campaign will be leadership. And they, frankly, are relishing what they hope will be a spectacle in San Francisco of Mondale being unable to control his own troops.
We've had some bad conventions. I think the 1980 convention was a bad one because the primary impression that went out to the American people was that the Democratic Party was divided and that we never were able to heal the Kennedy-Carter rift even up until November. The 1968 convention was a bad one in Chicago. I think the 1984 convention will be a good one. I think the differences that now have existed in the Democratic Party because of a primary campaign, a tough campaign, will be healed. And I think the strong desire of the Democrats to replace Reagan in the White House will overcome any remaining differences among us. That's my prediction. I believe it's a good one.
What advice would you give Mr. Mondale about debating Ronald Reagan?
Well, I predicted before that President Reagan, as he did in 1980, will try to avoid a series of definitive debates, that he will try to have one debate where personalities and impressions and generalities can prevail. And my advice to both candidates would be to let the American people understand where you stand and let there be a series of debates.
Do you have any advice on tactics?
Not yet. I doubt if he would seek my advice on it.
I thought you were going to say he should lock up his briefing books.
I don't know how President Reagan will do without the briefing books.
I'm Leslie Stahl. Have a good week.
Face the Nation with White House correspondent Leslie Stahl was produced by CBS News, which is solely responsible for the selection of today's guests and topic. This broadcast originated from San Francisco, California.